Now, most people tend to think that to be more productive, you need to be constantly busy all the time. You have a to-do list the size of a phone book, to always be on work mode, and loading yourself with dangerous amounts of caffeine to the point where your withdrawal symptoms are similar to that of a meth addict. But the truth is, actually being productive is different from being busy. And the steps to being a more productive person are actually easier than you think. And in this video, I'll be sharing with you 4 simple steps that could quite literally make you more productive today. Starting with the first step, which is prioritize. Now, one of the fundamental truths of life and productivity is that not everything is important. Some things are actually way more important than others. Now, that statement actually does sound like common sense, but most times common sense is usually not common practice. Sometimes we could find ourselves doing things that really do not move the needle in any shape or form, like going through your email when you have a really important task that is still pending. Now, there's a really interesting mental picture that really helped me to grasp this concept of priorities, and it goes like this. Now, I want you to imagine some rocks, some sand, and a jar, and your goal is to fit the rocks and the sand in that jar. Now, if you start with putting the sand into the jar before you start putting the rocks, at some point you'll find out that the rocks will not be able to fit in completely into the jar. But if you were to start with the rocks and then proceed to fill the sand inside the jar, you would find out that it's going to be a lot easier to actually fit in as much sand as you can compared to when you try to force the rocks to fit into the jar. Now, that is exactly how priorities work. The rocks are your most important tasks, the sand are your least important tasks, and the jar is the amount of time you have in the day. Now, if you try to start with your least important tasks, over time you will discover that you will actually have no time to actually complete your most important tasks for the day. And when you are prioritizing, you're basically tackling the most important tasks first. And the really good thing about prioritizing is that when you prioritize your most important tasks, not a day will go by without you at least accomplishing one important task for the day. But if you decide to start with the least important tasks, you are at a high risk of actually going through the entire day, doing busy work, but eventually accomplishing nothing. And that leads us to the next step, which is time blocking. Now, to be able to fit in your most important tasks for the day, you need to create time for your most important tasks for that day. Now, that's where time blocking comes in. Now, time blocking is essentially using the calendar to visualize what time in the day and how much time you're going to spend to carry out a particular task. Now, why this is really helpful is because it actually helps you to not fall into the trap of overestimating what you can achieve in a day. Now, sometimes we can have like ridiculously long to-do lists and expect ourselves to finish all of that in one day. And I mean, we still need to sleep. Now, there's a really big issue that I want to caution you with while using this time blocking technique, because over the couple of years where I have actually used this technique, I've noticed a really common problem, and that is the problem whereby I'm not able to completely follow my time blocking schedule. And I discovered a concept that actually helped me to solve this problem to a great extent, and that is actually an idea I got from the book Psychology of Money. Although this idea was mainly financial related, but I discovered that it trickles down to virtually almost every facet of life, and that is, it is better to be reasonable than to be rational. Now, I'm sure you're wondering, Bernard, what do you mean by it is better to be reasonable than being rational? What does that mean? Now, with this time blocking method, it is very easy. I mean, it's so easy to fall into the trap of actually time blocking every single moment of your day, to the point where ChatGPT even has nothing on your schedule, my bruh. But the many countless failures, I've discovered that humans are not robots and we are not spreadsheets. At 2:45 p.m., instead of reading, you might feel the urge to want to scroll on Instagram, and you might cave into that urge. And when you scroll on Instagram for like a couple of minutes, you discover that, oh, you're spilling it into a particular thing you're supposed to do at that time, and then you feel guilty. You want to cover that guilt by scrolling more on Instagram, and when you scroll more on Instagram, you spend more time, which makes you feel even more guilty. I mean, you can see where this is going. Yeah, it creates a vicious cycle, and eventually your entire plan for the day is entirely thrown into the trash. So that begs the question, what does being reasonable mean? Now, being reasonable in this case is actually by creating buffers within your day. So instead of having a situation where you have back to back activities, you have a point where you have an activity and then there is a break of a couple of minutes. I mean, depending on how large the activity is, like let's say you've been carrying out a task for about 6 hours. Now, a reasonable thing to do is to give yourself like an hour break or an hour 30 minutes break to actually maybe eat lunch or to do other things that life may throw at you. And if the task is not so long, you could actually have 15 minutes buffers between each task. So you're not in a situation where if you spend more time on the previous task, you find yourself continuously splitting into another task to the point where you are completely out of sync with your planned schedule. Now, having these buffers actually helps you to transition into the next activity. Now, the next step is to have keystone habits. Now, what is a keystone habit? A keystone habit is a habit that lays the foundation for you to have a productive day. Now, a good example of a keystone habit is sleeping and waking up at the same time. Now, this is actually one of the most important keystone habits that you can actually cultivate. Now, this is because if you cannot predict when you sleep and when you wake up, it's going to be quite difficult to actually predict how your day would go. Now, when you've locked down this keystone habit, everything else becomes way easier. Now, that leads us to the next keystone habit, which is your planning habit. Now, typically, I tend to wake up at around 5 a.m. every day, even on weekends. And no, I am not crazy. I don't know why anytime I say this, people tend to think I'm crazy. If you're one of them, I assure you I'm not. I like to think I'm not, actually. When I wake up, the next phase of action is to actually begin to plan my day. Now, why this is really important is because planning your day actually helps you to create the blueprint for how your day would go. Your sleeping habit lays the foundation, while your planning habit creates the blueprint of how you would actually build your super awesome and productive day. The planning phase is where you do your time blocking and your buffers. Actually, when you get these two keystone habits right, every other thing usually tends to fall into place. And the only thing you need to focus on is in the execution, which leads us to the next step, which is get rid of all distractions. Now, after my many failures of trying to have a super productive day, I've realized something. The main obstacle to you actually having the most productive day you could possibly have is yourself. True, life does happen, but 85, dare I say 90% of the time, the issues with the execution of your perfectly laid out plan will most likely be destroyed by something that is directly or indirectly related to you. And that will continuously be a recurring theme if you don't have guardrails to protect against that. And one guardrail that I use that I'm going to share with you is by actually scheduling time for social media. Yeah, I said it, social media. I mean, the rational thing is to completely do away with social media and never ever touch Instagram or TikTok and be completely indistractable and ride off into the sunset, having productive days ever after. But in reality, that usually doesn't happen. Sometimes we tend to fall into temptations here and there, and we end up doom scrolling 1 hour or 2 hours of our time completely just down the drain like that. But what I've noticed is that when you schedule the time for social media, you actually have an excuse to not go into social media. Because when you actually are tempted to say, oh, I mean, just a little scroll here and there, it's not going to hurt, you remind yourself that, hey, okay, you actually have time scheduled for this, and it's a whole lot easier to actually resist that temptation to scroll at that moment than when you do not have any time planned for it. Because in your head, you're like, I don't really have time planned for it. I might as well just squeeze in some couple of scrolls here and there. And that usually is the beginning of the end of your plan and your time block and your execution. I mean, everything just goes to drain. I think you get what I mean. So the reasonable thing to do is to time block your social media time. So when it's time for you to actually scroll, you actually have something. And because I said you should schedule social media, please do it after you finish your most important task. I mean, prioritizations, yeah? So when you do your most important task, you can actually use that as a reward to actually reward yourself and also protect yourself from distractions. And another guardrail that I use is by actually turning off notifications. Now, because there's a really popular saying, out of sight is also out of mind. When you're at a point where you don't even see the notifications to begin with, there's a lower chance of you actually thinking about going on social media throughout the day. And another guardrail is by actually setting alarms. Now, sometimes your calendar notification might not really do justice to actually alert you to do some certain things. So it helps sometimes to actually set alarms at intervals during the day to actually remind yourself to do some really, really important tasks that you've planned during the day. So this actually helps to sync together with your time blocking. Our wisdom nugget for the week: teach us to number our days that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. And guys, if you like this video, please don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps with the algorithm. And if you came across a point that really resonated with you, I would love to see what you think about it in the comment section. And if you have more steps that you use in your day-to-day to actually help you become more productive, please also share it in the comment section. I would also love to learn from you. And guys, if you constantly find yourself falling into the trap of social media, now this video titled How to Escape the Dopamine Trap is actually going to help you a lot. And like always, guys, remember to always keep it real. Bye, guys.